All right. Had a problem with my microphone there. Thought I had it fixed. Sorry about that. We are now live on the FTN Network, brought to you always by the world famous FTN Network. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, and we are going to be going over the DraftKings early slate, which is 2 games, and then we're going to be talking about the main slate as well. However, the reason I'm coming on late tonight is because I was hoping the slate would drop. It didn't. So what I've done in the past with these MTE events is the fact that I'll talk about the games that I think will be on the slate. We won't have salaries at our disposal, but we'll talk about players that are relevant in any other games that will be. And once that drops, if anybody's cheap or we've talked about, then you can know to play them. These MTE events, these feast week tournaments can be tricky. Lock happens early. Games we saw with today, Cajun Shredrick of Texas. That game locked at 6:45 EST. The news of him being out came out 22 minutes later. 70% of the field have him. Sometimes you get bit by these plays. Sometimes you don't. You need to be especially careful when it comes to these MTE Feast Week tournaments. Make sure you're playing a reasonable amount of bankroll that if you do get bit, you're not going to be crippled, and maybe even playing a little bit less just because this does happen. I have a story about this happening to me years ago with Beetle Bolden when he was on, I believe, West Virginia. He was a late scratch, late into his career. I had a really banger of a lineup, finished second in a lot of high-dollar tournaments with a bagel from Bolden. And I was the only one with him, too. So that one especially hurt me, as you can possibly imagine. So you just have to be really, really careful with these MTE Feast Week stuff. Tomorrow, there are going to be games locking early left and right. We don't even have the slate out yet. We're still waiting for UCLA and Marquette to end. Right now, it is about the 15-minute mark. UCLA by 12. Once that game ends, the rest of the slate will come out, but we'll be able to – oh, look at that. Nope, still don't have it. So we will get into it here in a moment. I appreciate those of you who are watching live. Make sure you're hitting the like button there if you are, or on demand. Good to see you, Don, that you're in the chat. We can definitely answer any questions you have or look at any games that maybe you've had a chance to look at. I'm sure you've got some stuff that you're feeling like and want some second opinions about, so I'm happy to provide that with you as we go. We are going to start off with this 2-game early slate. Then, like I said, we're going to jump in and talk about some of the games that I believe will be on the slate for tomorrow's main. This will be kind of a quicker rendition of the show. But for what it's worth, we're going to continue, and tomorrow night will be the same thing. All right, so games tomorrow morning. So let's just start with the slate, and then we'll get into it. So this 2-game early, Syracuse versus Gonzaga, Florida State versus Colorado. The Colorado Buffaloes were the main offenders tonight in DFS, aside from KJ Simpson, who did really well, and Javon Hadley, who was super chalky, but Tristan DeSilva and Cody Williams, both really awful, did not look good at all, was a very, very big bust. We'll start here with this Syracuse versus Gonzaga game. This is a Syracuse team with new management, if you will. They don't run the zone under Adrian Autry exclusively. They run more of a matchup, man-to-man zone type of thing. They will revert back to the zone occasionally, but they don't play it as exclusively as they did under Coach Boeheim. In this one, Ken Palm has it 88-73 in favor of Gonzaga. He is expecting them to score a lot. Syracuse defense to this point hasn't been very good. They are playing at the 16th fastest tempo in the country. Just had a loss today to Tennessee, 73-56. The Vol stack on early slate would have been a banger had you played it. Our guy Dalton Knecht did his thing, 17 points, knocked down 3 triples, and Triple J, 12 rebounds, 15 points. Jonas Idu, 14 and 11. Like, stacking against Syracuse is going to be the thing to do. Gonzaga had a tough go of it, lost by 10 to Purdue. Once Zach Edey got everybody in the front court into foul trouble, meaning Graham Ike and Anton Watson, he just ran unimpeded throughout, continued to dunk, and put in easy bucket after easy bucket, 25 points, 14 rebounds for him. So you saw what happened there. Gonzaga's lack of depth really hurt them. This is something that we worried about as soon as they lost Steele Venters for the year. it was pretty much going to be a tough one. The WCC as a whole, especially with St. Mary's looking trashy, is going to take a step back. That's going to allow those people who say Gonzaga never plays anyone to kind of, bang their chest and pat themselves on the back, because it is going to be a down year for the WCC. I'm pretty confident in that. It was nice to see Dusty Stromer, the freshman, had a fairly decent game. Ben Gregg, who was our super value play of the morning, he had a nice game. But overall, Watson and EK just stuck in foul trouble the entire way. Nemhard and Hickman did okay. Hickman still has to prove to us that he can handle these big moments, but he's going to have to play majority of the game. So either way, he's going to have to do something more than he's done in the past. All right, we'll start on the Syracuse side. It's pretty cut and dry with what Syracuse wants to do. We know they're going to play their starters into the ground. Right now, it's J.J. Starling, Chris Bell, Justin Taylor, Judah Mintz, and Naheem McLeod. There may be a point in time where Benny Williams takes a starting spot from either Chris Bell or Naheem McLeod. However, Chris Bell, since the last time Syracuse was on the slate, has done a lot of damage and has kind of proven us wrong on the show, saying that he's really not going to ever be a fantasy asset. He had a nice game today, 16 real points. Didn't really do a whole lot of other stats, but in 33 minutes, he knocked down 2 threes, did have a steal and a block. He's somebody that has played really, really well since then. Made his price come up to 5.5 as well because of it, since he was 4.5 just a couple slates ago when that Canisius slate was on the slate that we were breaking down, and Colgate. The bench for the Syracuse includes Malik Brown, Benny Williams, Kyle Cuffey, and Quadir Copeland. Copeland started out really hot before Benny Williams got back from his suspension. Now his minutes have dwindled. Cuffey had a first good game. His minutes have dwindled as well. I don't think we can really consider either of those guys unless you're building multiple lineups on this 2-gamer. And you're playing for different scenarios such as foul trouble, ineffectiveness, injuries, things of that nature. Kind of tough to do. Copeland there at 3.5. If he were to get the minutes he saw in the first game, he'd be great, of course, but you just can't count on that, especially not against Gonzaga. So really the best value that we're going to have available to us, unless Benny Williams starts, who's sitting there at 3.6. His first 2 games back from suspension, he's played 9 and 16 minutes. Looked very good against Tennessee today. I think we'll see him get more minutes. I don't mind taking a shot at him at 3.6, but otherwise, if you're sticking with starters, Naheem McLeod is there at 4.4, locked into a 22-minute role. If he can, get anyone in the Gonzaga in foul trouble, he's a shot blocking extraordinaire. He can definitely pay this price off and maybe put up 22 fantasy points. I do think taking bigs against Gonzaga will be a thing this year for sure. Justin Taylor at 5.2, he makes sense playing heavy minutes. As I said, most of their starters are. He has been relatively mediocre the last 2 games, but he is out there getting a lot of peripheral stats. His shots are starting to dwindle. That's a bit of concern. Malik Brown off the bench at 5.2. A little bit tough for me to get there. I think, if he were to get into the starting lineup, and he showed flashes last year, but right now he's basically a non-factor for me right now in terms of main team lineups. Chris Bell at 5.5. I wasn't in on him at 4.5. I wasn't even in on him at 4K. Wasn't in on him today at 4.9. He has produced over the last 2 games. It's tough for me to now go in on him at 5.5, but he's taken a ton of shots. 19 shots against Colgate, 13 against Tennessee. 14 of those 19 against Colgate were from long range, and he dialed it in, hitting 43% of those 14, which is 6. That is massive. Just banging triple after triple. Now, he's not adding a lot of other stats. He's only adding scoring, and he's taking a ton of shots. Looking at his shot right now, it's ballooned up to 28.4%. Shot usage rate is over 21%. Now, his shot rate last year got to a high of about 21%. Always had a low usage rate, but he did take 113 triples, shot about 35%. So he took volume there. He's already 30 triples in through 4 games. So on pace to shatter his attempts if he continues at this rate, and he's playing a ton of minutes. So we definitely can look at him. It's a short slate. It's a forward spot. Forwards are typically hard to fill. So I don't hate the idea of playing Chris Bell, but I do hate the idea of paying 5.5 for him when I wouldn't pay 4K for him a couple of weeks ago. So I do feel a little bit bent out of shape about that, but we have limited options here, right? J.J. Starling's priced appropriately at 6.4. He was a super value at 5 and 5.5. He's going to play lots of minutes. He's going to take shots, but you know how it is with Starling. He's really not the best shooter. saw him shoot 31% from the field today. Back in their first game, he shot 23%. He's getting volume, but he's just not an efficient player. But he is adding a lot in the assist and rebound category, so he's fine at 6'4" if you want him. Not a priority, though. And then you have Judah Mintz. It's been real tough, man. You notice these slates, you're seeing the studs and scrubs, and the studs aren't really paying off. We saw with today, Jesse Edwards had a nice 30, right? Wasn't a huge game for him. Donovan Clingan played 12 minutes. That just the super pay-ups, they're not paying off that price. Obviously, Edey did this morning, and if you went there and you just kind of put a bunch of crap in your lineup next to him, you probably still did okay. But it is getting increasingly tougher to roster these 9, 5, 10K, 11K players because they're just not putting up those giant scores. We know Mintz is capable of doing so. His assist rate is negatively impacted by Starling, but he is a big-time shot taker for them. He is a guy who generates a lot of points at the line. If Syracuse could keep this close into the end of the game, he would be the guy. You've seen he's taken 9+ free throws in every single game this year, derives a lot of his value from his scoring ability. Don't hate the idea, especially after what we saw. Braden Smith played really well against them today, but I do think bigs against Gonzaga is really going to be the thing. Graham Ike, who was coming out shooting threes against Purdue there, trying to make Edey work. Foul trouble really limited him. Played 27 minutes, 25 fantasy points. I think he would have done a lot more. Saw him, put up some big stats in their previous games, lesser tier opponents, going up against a Syracuse front court that is, isn't able to contain interior players at all. Ike's comfortable shooting threes. He's comfortable banging down low. He's actually a really upper tier play that I would love to prioritize at 8.5 if we can make his salary work. Anton Watson at 7.3. I think people will majority of the time look elsewhere, like playing Ike. Watson is his own worst enemy. Foul trouble is what really brings him down. You see in their first 2 games, again, against lesser tier competition, no foul trouble. He nuked it. Today against Purdue, foul trouble, didn't nuke it. 18 fantasy points, 24 minutes, did take 10 shots, had 4 assists, but the foul trouble is what really gets him. This is a great spot for him against the Syracuse defense. Anytime they decide to go to zone, which again, they don't play primarily anymore, Watson is a absolute zone buster. He has passing ability. He can hit jumpers. He's a very tough person to defend when zone defense is happening. Not as tough in the man-to-man, but he's definitely a guy at 7.3 that can obliterate his price tag. If you can't get to EK, Watson is a very nice consolation price. Other guys that we want to look at, I think I'm back on the Ben Gregg train. He had a really big first half. I think I got all 3 of his steals in that first half. He didn't play as much in the second, but 18 minutes at 3.8, put up 17 fantasy points. At 4K, I think I'm really comfortable with him. He has a very high rebounding rate. Very good defender, very good anticipation on any passes on the interior and on the wing. Watching him play, I think he's going to be a guy that gets a lot of minutes next year. So at 4K, he makes a lot of sense to me as a value play and somebody that I'm certainly maybe not prioritizing, but when it comes to cheapies, I'm rolling him in there. Dusty Stromer should see a exuberant amount of ownership, especially after he put up 22 fantasy points today in 31 minutes against Purdue. At 3.9, his price didn't change. He's going to be tasked with playing a lot of minutes. They really don't have any other options outside of Nembhard, Hickman, Watson, and Ike. So Stromer is going to have to be more than the 5th Beatle, more than that dreaded 5th starter that stands around doing nothing. We need more out of Dusty Stromer, and he showed it today. So expect high ownership on him, and I think it's fine. You could play him and Greg, and maybe that allows you to get up and play the Mintz, Ike, KJ Simpson group if you really want to. So I'm perfectly fine with that. Hickman at 5.7. It's a decent price for him at sub 6K. He's going to play a majority of the game. Again, he tends to kind of disappear in these upper tier games. He's got a completely different role this year. He's going to be asked to really be the 3rd option at times, and he's going to have to hit shots. He took 14 of them today, made 5. He's going to have to do a hell of a lot better than that, especially on games where he only gives us 2 assists and 1 rebound. He's going to have to score 15 to 20 real points. So he's fine at 5.7, but he needs to really prove it to me before I sit here and put him in any cores, especially when we can have Ryan Nembhard for just 500 more. Nembhard threw down a 30 today. Expect him to put up 30 plus against the Syracuse team. 17 shots taken. That's the second time already this season that he has taken that many shots. Nembhard and Gonzaga, they go together so well, don't they? They have kids in the future that play. You know they're going to be Bulldogs down the road. Nembhard's assist rate already 29%. Only shooting 16% from long range, 2 of 12. Going to have to fix that, but he's playing 98.8% of the minutes. That's the second most in all of college basketball. You know what you're going to get with Ryan Nembhard. He's never going to leave the floor, especially in competitive games. They'll be in a lot of them this year. Ryan Nembhard is an easy lock and load. So it sounds like we're going to play a lot of Gonzaga, right? We are. And minimum of 3 Gonzaga players in your lineup on this 2-game slate, maybe even 4. Remember the days of Gonzaga, and they don't have any guys like this truly for DFS purposes. But you go back a couple of years ago to the, let's see, not the title game runners-up, but not even the Admin Gilder years. I think it was 2018, 2019. Yes. And they had Rui Hachimura, Brandon Clark, Zach Norvell, and Josh Perkins. Corey Kispert was the 5th starter of that team. Now, I know Kispert ended up being a fantasy stud a year or two later, but he was the 5th Beetle, 5th starter on that team, and he was just a 3-point shooter. The other 4 did the heavy lifting. They did not play their bench very often. Killian Tilly was never healthy. Gino Crandall was a solid backup. Jeremy Jones was a solid backup, but basically anytime Gonzaga was on the slate, you just played all 4 of those guys, Hachimura, Clark, Noel, Perkins, and you crushed. They all went nuclear. We aren't to that level of play with this Gonzaga team, but we are with their minutes. 5 years, 3, 4, 5 years later, we're in a situation here where they're going to play their starters majority of the game. Ben Gregg, their primary bench piece. They have the freshman, Braden Huff, who has shown flashes already, although he struggled today, obviously, as a freshman. Looked really good against Yale, might look okay against Syracuse. We'll see what his minutes end up being there with regularity. But I think we're going to see a situation here where, yeah, we can play Ryan Nembhard. We can play Nolan Hickman. We can play Watson and Ike. And barring foul trouble, those guys are all going to play 30, 35 minutes, maybe even more. But I like the idea of Gregg, Stromer, Nembhard, and one of Watson, Ike. That's kind of where my head is at the moment. All right, Florida State versus Colorado. Man, Colorado, dude, that was just brutal the way that they played there against Richmond. This is a Richmond team that's really not very good. Javon Hadley, fantastic game. 6 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 4 steals, and a block. The top value of the night. Tristan Da Silva played 34 minutes, had 15 points, 8 rebounds, and a steal. Not enough, though. Not enough at his almost $8K salary. We need more. He's not $6K anymore, so he's got to do more than that. Freshman Cody Williams had a really disappointing game. 32 minutes, 6 points, 2 rebounds, and a steal. A lot of fit bidding there. Eddie Lampkin struggled in his 30 minutes, 6 points and 6 rebounds. KJ Simpson was the stud, 23 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists, knocked down 2 triples, got to the foul line a ton, made 9 of 10 there. And then you had minimal production from the bench, which is majority going to be Julian Hammond and our Luke O'Brien. So looking at the Colorado side here and what Ken Palm has on the docket here, 80-73 in favor of Colorado. They are a top 50 defensive efficiency, top 20 offensive efficiency. Prior to the Richmond game, they were just like a wrecking crew. But you got to look at, they played Towson, Grambling State, and Milwaukee. So a lot of this non-con stuff we have to kind of sift through. Florida State, 109th in defensive efficiency, top 70 in offensive efficiency, 45th fastest tempo in the country as it stands right now. Colorado, 196th. The Colorado pricing is such that we can fit pretty much anyone we want, technically, but we got to look at where we're going to get the most bang for that buck. KJ Simpson at 8.3. Yes, he's the highest salaried player, but he is also probably the best player to use as well. This is going to be the breakout year for him. Coming into Colorado, he's had his ups and downs all of last year, but he's been super steady throughout, playing a lot of minutes, taking a lot of shots. He is their go-to scorer when they need a bucket. You go down to 4.6, where there is another value available that will be super high owned. Javon Hadley at that 4.6 price. He scored 27 plus DK points in 3 of his 4 played. Needless to say, he is an obvious lock and load and a very good option in its own right. Looking at the rates for both Simpson and Hadley, Hadley has a usage rate over 16%, but an 8.5% offensive rebounding rate. Draws almost 5 fouls per 40. Does a little bit of everything. Simpson, 30% shot rate, making 50% of his threes on 16 attempts. That's big. He's also drawing 7 fouls per 40, has a 3.5% steal rate, and a top 30 assist rate at 39.2%. Those are the top 2 options for Colorado. Guards. We need forwards. You have Cody Williams, the freshman, who honestly wow. That game against Richmond was absolutely painful to watch. He was one of my favorite plays on the slate. Came in at like 32%. There was a real big difference maker there if he could have performed well. It didn't happen. He missed, a game earlier, and I was worried because they're not making it like, oh, it's not an injury, it's undisclosed, it's unknown. Like, there's not a lot of info there. There's speculation. And watching today, there must be some sort of hidden injury, right? Because there's no way he could possibly be that bad after missing a game. So I'm not really looking at Cody Williams. I think it makes a lot of sense to use him in your alt build because I don't think anybody will. I mean, obviously 2-game slate, there'll be some people on him, but you're probably talking about 8 to 10% at most. And he's shown upside in the past. It's a tougher spot against Florida State, who I do think will end up being a pretty solid defense. I know they gave up 80 to 90 points to Florida recently, but if you saw them today, they were hell on wheels at times. Looked like a vintage Leonard Hamilton defense. So I'm a little bit worried about Cody Williams right now. We're not using Hammond and O'Brien because they're almost 6K and they're coming off the bench. It's a little bit tough for me. I think Eddie Lampkin is okay, but I see foul trouble, which he's only gotten into foul trouble 1 game this year, but I think it'll be 2 when it's all said and done here. So that really just leaves us with Tristan Da Silva, who's a solid high floor player, 25 to 30 fantasy points, has not shown his upside, but against Grambling State, he does have that capability. He is going to take a lot of shots, but I feel like his upside might be limited because he's not going to have these big 25 and 15 games. He did have a few big ones last year, no doubt, but I think that we're really going to be looking at a 14, 7, and 2 type of player more often than not. And when he's in that 6K range, that's great. But at 7.5 to 8, it's a little bit tough. So there's not a lot of upside here, I think, for Da Silva, but he is a safe option and somebody that you can put in. I don't think he's as much as a priority today as he's been in the past, but he's certainly a playable option, no doubt. Then with Florida State, they're still, like I said, classic Leonard Hamilton. They're going to play a million guys. He's going to find walk-ons that he can utilize. Now, they did give up 75 to UNLV, so you might say, well, what do you mean their defense is good? But in the second half, they were forcing turnovers. Baba Miller was blocking shots. Now, I know Baba's offensive game still looks as limited as ever. Somebody who was talked about as a potential, lotto pick at one point. He needs to work on his offensive game, but defensively, he had a block. I got to go find that video, and I'm going to do that after the show. He had a straight up, one of the cleanest blocks you'll ever see, straight up with the guy. And it wasn't like a swat to the stands. It was straight up and the one-hand block, bring the ball down. It was just sicko stuff. And it reminds you and shows you, Baba Miller is got a crazy amount of upside and athleticism, but his offensive game, God, needs so much improvement. And I have a really hard time not rostering him, and it's going to be tough for me again. But they do play a rotation of 9 to 10 guys. We know that's the case. All really negatively affected Cam Fletcher today, who only had 13 minutes. And I've seen on the last FSU slate, Fletcher was a pretty chalky option. He was under 5K. Was he 3K a couple of slates ago against Florida? I know a lot of people were on him. But those minutes, man, he's just been super efficient with them. He wasn't today, and you saw what happened there. So at 5K, you're really kind of playing with fire there, not in a good way at 13 to 15 minutes with the inefficiency. I'd still rather play Baba Miller, who I know you guys are going to roll your eyes at 5-1. His price keeps going up as well. But you look at what he does. He's just so good with stocks. He's a solid enough rebounder. It's just his limited offensive game. If he could knock down threes with any consistency or look to attack, man, I don't know. This is a 40 fantasy point player here if his offensive game could catch up to his athleticism and his defense. But he may very well just get 18 in stocks alone, even if he scores 2 to 5 points. Love the spot for him against Colorado. I know I'm going to be one of the few that probably wants to roster him. We're looking at a tough spot in forward to fill. But I'm still a believer in Miller. I'm not giving up on him. And look at the minutes played against UNLV, 32 on a Leonard Hamilton team that is super deep, plays all these guys. He played Baba Miller 32 minutes. So obviously he's here to stay. We just need his offensive game to catch up. So he's still in play at 5-1, still like him a lot. We saw a ton out of Darren Green today, who also played over 30 minutes, 34. Jameer Watkins had an amazing game, 19, 8, and 4. He played 30 minutes. So really the quartet of Watkins, Worley, Miller, and Green playing a ton of minutes. Deontay Green came off the bench, and might he be someone who's interesting at 3-1? I think yes. He had 13.5 fantasy points in 14 minutes against UNLV. He just got himself under the basket. UNLV kept cheating out to the perimeter, and they kept throwing lobs, and Deontay Green just kept dunking them in. I don't think that'll be the case against the Colorado front court, but he is intriguing to a degree at 3-1. Maybe a sub 5% value that you can use in large field GPPs such as the Jam makes a little bit of sense. We saw a lot of green on green violence, if you will, and they were crushing it. Darren Green and Deontay Green, all like the last 5 minutes of the second half. Those dudes were just throwing lobs like they were like Lob City from the LA Clippers a couple of years ago. Gotta like Darren Green at 6K, playing all those minutes. Doesn't have the highest upside, but he's certainly safe. Gotta like Jameer Watkins also at 6K. He has much more upside than Green, playing more minutes in competitive games, which this should be. Taken 22 shots in his past 2 games. I am a big fan of Watkins, and he does offer us forward upside. Tough for me to go to Cam Corrin at 6'4". I know he put up 40 against Florida. He just had 22 against UNLV, but 6'4" is just way too high for me. I'd rather just play Watkins, who I know is going to be way more consistent, or I'd rather just be stubborn as an ox and keep rolling with Baba Miller. Also at 5-1, we have Jalen Warley, who is in a bona fide, solidified starter spot, and in competitive games, we can expect him to play 25 to 30 minutes. Might Leonard Hamilton be playing more starters this much all season? Possibly. Even though he has run a deep rotation throughout his heyday, there's usually 2 to 3 guys that he does rely upon pretty heavily. And those, 2 to 3 will play every single minute possible. So it's kind of the reputation of him to, they play all these guys, but Trent Forrest a couple of years ago, he played a ton of minutes for them. Devin Vassell was kind of hit or miss. MJ Walker ended up playing a ton of minutes. Who was the other guard that they had? Terrence Mann. Terrence Mann played a ton of minutes for them. Mifiano Kabengele did not play a ton of minutes for them, but he was so awesome. So there's a history of Florida State under Coach Leonard Hamilton playing certain guards or top players big minutes. So we can rest assured that Watkins and probably Warley are going to continue to play big minutes, and Baba Miller looks locked in right now because his defense is at such a peak high performance, and they have the scoring around him that his his limited offensive game doesn't hurt them as much. It's going to be like Corrin, Nickelberry, Jackson, Deontay Green. It's going to be those guys who see the revolving minutes and hot hand type situation. So you have to be a little bit careful with that. And I don't even know that Warley's like super straight up like, yeah, he's going to play 35 minutes. If Fletcher got hot and Warley wasn't, it wouldn't shock me to see those guys switch their minutes played. But I am going to keep playing Baba Miller. I'm going to continue to do so. If his price got to like 6K or something, then I'd be like, okay. But at 5-1, like, I'm not going to stop. So that's pretty much the 2-gamer. I would say at this point to core, got to be Ryan. Got it. Andrew on the brain. Ryan Nembhard. I think at 6'2", that's just like stupid simple, right, to play. Core play number 2 for me was got to be Javon Hadley from Colorado, just a super value. And then one of Ben Gregg, Dusty Stromer. Stromer is going to be the chalk value because he's going to play the minutes. Gregg's just hyper efficient, but don't be surprised if Stromer, has a down game and Gregg puts up more than him. That's big time GPP leverage for you there, knowing Stromer is going to carry, 75% ownership compared to Gregg's 10%. and very easily could be a higher scorer than Stromer. Just because Stromer looks so good today doesn't mean he's going to go out there and suddenly be some 25 fantasy point per game scorer. Maybe, but I kind of doubt that. With that being said, Stromer, if you can only play one, Stromer is the obvious choice, but I do not allow ownership to dictate who I play. But I think Stromer is just, from a minute standpoint, a little bit safer, obviously. All right. Hey, Justin Jefferson fan. What's up, Jeremy? Your forklift broke down at work? Damn, bro. Do you got to put that? Do you got to fix it, or you guys got somebody you call on staff, or what, man? I drove a forklift at my old job. That's a fun deal, but breakdown, damn. I hope you weren't like having a big pallet on it or something and it just fell over on something. That would not be fun. But it's good to see you. Good to see you. Looks like Marquette's taking a 57-54 lead over UCLA. Bona's stuck at 3 rebounds. It's not going to give me the 8 I need, has he? And what a trash slate. Absolutely trash slate. I don't even want to see it. I don't even want to see it. God, I needed that 8 rebounds. All right. Shows you the volatility of these early season props and DFS in general. All right. So before I get into what I think will be part of the main slate, you want me to talk about some of you said 10 a.m. games. I'm imagining you're in Central Time. So you must be talking about Long Beach State, Iona, FIU, LMU, and Binghamton Sacred Heart. Now I know Mike Randall's betting show is going to be on, I believe, tomorrow morning. So he's going to be talking a lot about that, but I can tell you a lot of it, not even a little bit, but a lot of it about the Long Beach State Iona game, if you'd like. Looks like in this one, DK has it -5 for Long Beach State. Long Beach State has Mr. Dan Monson, the originator of the Gonzaga dream season program that they have way back in 1999 when Gonzaga started this, craziness. Monson took the Minnesota job and because, he couldn't have known that Gonzaga was going to do what they did. And, obviously Mark Few took advantage, and I'm sure, he's had interviews where he says he doesn't kick himself, but he does. He does. Didn't work out at Minnesota, goes to Long Beach State. He's been there since 2008, and he's really built them into a pretty strong program. I know looking at them right now, they're 2-3, so you might be saying they're not good, but under Monson, they are pretty good. They play at the 10th fastest tempo in the country right now. They beat a bad DePaul team. They gave San Diego State a game. They beat Michigan 94-86. They've got players on their team. Marcus Tishonis, who is a former Husky, big-time scoring machine. Lassina Traore, Babakor Traore, those are 2 guys who are tough as nails. Lassina used to play for St. Louis. They are both really good. Issa Silva is there. You might remember him from his Stanford role-playing days just a couple of seasons ago. They've got a pretty good roster of guys. Messiah Thompson, who was a big-time scorer from Campbell. This is a good roster. They play really tough. I was surprised to see them lose to Illinois State. I thought that was a game they should have probably won. Illinois State doesn't particularly strike fear in the hearts of anyone. Darius Burford is a really strong player, but he wasn't that good, and they lost. So tough loss there, but going up against an Iona team without Coach Rick P., they're not very good. Totally stripped of all, right? Like everybody leaves. They do have Aiden Treadout, who is a transfer from Harvard, a big-time three-point shooter, as kind of their main weapon. They also have Joel Brown, who I can't even believe has college eligibility left after he spent like 5 years at Cal. So they've got some people too, but not a particularly great team. Their defense is bottom 250 in the country. They're a slower team. I think that the -5 for Long Beach here is good. Ken Palm does have it 77-72. I like Long Beach State to win pretty comfortably here. And when I say comfortably, I don't mean 30 points. I mean probably like 9 to 10. I just don't see Iona having the juice to compete here. Now, Iona, they got their just absolute doors blown off by High Point. It became a respectable score later, 82-68, but High Point just kind of nutted on them, for lack of a better term. And I think Long Beach State will do similar. They're a more talented team. So that is one that I am favoring there. You see the total's 154 as well, expected to have a lot of points. Sacred Heart is Mike Randall's team. He talks up Sacred Heart all the time, so I know he would be on them versus Binghamton. They are -4. That's a little lean for me. I think they win, so I would just take the money line, which is -170. But that's one where I think it'll be close throughout. Sacred Heart, coached by Andy Latina, good team in the Northeast, usually competitive. They have a couple of high usage kids. Nico Gillette, who is he's been around for quite a while for them, big time scorer, veteran player, and Tanner Thomas, who's a big time 3-point shooter as well in his third season. He's shooting 69% right now. That'll obviously regress some, especially when his career average before this was 31, but he has taken 17 threes and he's red freaking hot so far. So those are a couple of the early ones I like. Looking at the later games and throughout for other betting opportunities, perhaps High Point +1.5 versus Illinois State in that very same tournament that Long Beach State's playing in. I really like this High Point team. I am not a big believer in Illinois State, at least yet. So I do like that High Point +1.5 at the moment. There doesn't appear to be a money line in front of me on DK. I'm sure there will be at some point, right? But right now, High Point +1.5 is a very favorable bet. I do have them winning that one outright as well by at least 3 or 4 points. They're just a better team. Let's see. Drake's -1 versus Akron. I think that has some legs. I would have said earlier that Drake wins with ease. Akron just lost to Utah State 65-62. They're coached by John Gross, by the way. Drake lost to Stephen S. Austin 92-68. And I don't know how, but Tucker DeVries did absolutely nothing. He's like genuinely a legitimate MVC player of the year candidate. And Stephen S. Austin just came in and neutral court and just shut them down. This is a WAC team just rolling through. They lost in overtime to Middle Tennessee, which was a good team. They beat up on Northwestern State, beat up on Loyola Marymount. Now they beat up on Drake. Now they have a date with Utah State. So I don't know. This Stephen F. Austin team is pretty damn good all of a sudden. So anyways, Drake versus Akron -1. I would have said, like before, Drake wins that one, but I'm a little rattled on that. So kind of looking at some Akron action there and see if that line changes even more by the time we get later on, closer to lock. Stephen F. Austin is -1 versus Utah State. They're playing really, really well. Utah State is a team that has gone through some changes. They are now coached by Danny Sprinkle after years of Ryan Odom. Sprinkle, a lot of success at Montana State. So far, they've kind of just beat everybody in front of them. A really nice win over Akron earlier. I do like Stephen F. Austin straight up, and I'll be betting them. But this is a good Utah State team for sure. Looking at the total on that one as well, 147. I think the over is live. How about Tennessee +2 versus Purdue, by the way? That seems like a pretty good one. You can bet on Rick Barnes in the regular season. You just can't bet on him in the tournament. So just got to remember that. Let's see. Any other good ones here yet? Toledo +3 versus New Mexico. New Mexico is just they're banged up. They're trying to get some continuity with some of the new pieces there. They looked absolutely awful versus St. Mary's. They had to go late to put away a pretty mediocre UT Arlington team. Defensively, they're not there yet. They're playing at a really fast pace, which is nice. But this Toledo team, typically always pretty strong under Todd Kowalczyk. already, 3-0. Obviously, they haven't been super tested, but they did beat a tough Wright State team recently last Tuesday by 1. Also beat Louisiana and Detroit Mercy. This Toledo team has lost a lot of their great players that they've had over the years, but they still have Dante Maddox. They still have Raheem Moss. They bring in Tyler Cochran, who was from Ball State last year. This is a pretty solid Toledo team. So Toledo +3 versus New Mexico. Ken Palm has that one a 4-point game, which is pretty close, but I do think Toledo has a chance to win that outright or at least cover. All right, now let's go to what should be some main slate games here. And if you have any others that you want to ask about, feel free to ask them. This will be a rather quick portion here, and we'll be on our way out. Drop the skids before it happened. Well, thank God for that, man. Thank God for that. That I can only imagine. You watch some of them YouTube videos if you ever mindlessly turn your brain off and watch those, but I've seen some pretty wild accidents with those. All right. What's the best way to do this? Let's do a Bonner rebound check. Stefanovic has 9, so that's great. Bonner 4, fuck you. A lot of season left. All right, so the slate will start at 3 p.m. for those of us in covered wagons like myself, 6 p.m. for those of you on the East Coast. So that is looking like they don't even have is that right? It's kind of lame because I'm looking at that wrong. Okay. Yes, I was looking at that wrong. Sorry. That's the Eastern time. So let's see, 6. So we're going to have UNLV Richmond for sure. That game hits 2 teams that I think match up really well. Richmond, bottom 308th in tempo. UNLV 324th. Ken Palm projection on that one, 69-68. UNLV, dropped a pretty tough one to Florida State. The starting 5 that they'll typically run with, DeDon Thomas, Justin Webster, Lou Rod, Jalen Hill, and Isaiah Cottrell. Cottrell, a cheapie. I saw him in some lineups earlier today. Pretty low usage guy most of the time, but a sub 4K getting minutes, I suppose, could potentially work out. Transferred in from West Virginia. And then Caleb Boone came off the bench. Jackie Johnson also came off the bench. Right now, the Runnin' Rebels have a pretty short rotation. Caleb Boone is the most boom or bust guy. His brother is on the squad as well, but not available just yet. This would be a UNLV team that I would be looking to for Webster, Lou Rod, Jalen Hill, or Thomas. We know they're going to play a ton of minutes. The freshman, DeDon Thomas, has been really, really good so far this year. He's played a minimum of 36 minutes in every single game, and he has scored 13-plus real points in all but one, 5+ assists in every single game, and 6+ rebounds in 2 of his last 3. Also has 6 steals on the season, a steal rate of almost 3%, an assist rate of 30%, and a usage rate of 20%. So that freshman Thomas, he looks like he's going to be really, really good. And he's going to be priced up. I believe he was somewhere close to 7K earlier. That would be the case here again, probably even a little bit higher. Richmond, we talked about them at length in my write-up. We know Jordan King dogged us out tough the other night. We had his PRA where he had like 17 at half, finished with 23. Wasn't a problem tonight. They did not beat Colorado, but he was fantastic. 32% usage rate, 23 points, 7 rebounds and assists, played 38 minutes. Richmond has a litany of guys they use. Jordan King plays all of the game. Neil Quinn typically plays 30 minutes if he's not in foul trouble. Isaiah Bigelow, Delonte Hunt, and Aiden Noes, their minutes bounce around. We see a lot of DG Bailey off the bench. He's been sub 4K every slate so far. Played 27 minutes today, had 11 points and assist. He's somebody you can actually look at. We try to not use non-starters in our main lineups, but DG Bailey, depending on what the value looks like on this slate, is somebody that we can consider. Also love Jordan King. If King is under 7K again, like he's kind of just a lock here against UNLV. I think that even though it's a slower tempo on paper, it's just a really good spot to target. Richmond's rebounding numbers are awful. So we can also look on the other side of the running rebels, like Lou Rod, who's a very good offensive rebounder, Caleb Boone, who's obviously like super shot blocking, offensive rebounding machine, high usage rate, but a fouler to no end, and doesn't start, but that doesn't matter sometimes. Jalen Hill, one of the best rebounders on the team at this moment, combined rebounding rate over 28%. He's playing quite well. He's had over 30 fantasy points in several games, so I certainly like him. And then Cottrell is a 10% offensive rebounding rate, 5% block rate. Somebody at sub 4.5 as, like I said, a starter, but Caleb Boone is going to take minutes from him. It seems Cottrell's kind of like that was that faux starter, but then in the end of the game, there's usually a guy off the bench who plays those crunch time minutes, and that does look to be Boone. Jackie Johnson, who was at Duquesne's a couple of years ago, he's an interesting guy, high usage rate, but the minutes aren't there just yet. His shot rate is 34.1%. So he's out there chucking when he plays, but we're only going to get 11 to 12 minutes out of him. So that is one of the games we're likely to see. Let's go back down here. And I know this isn't the most ideal way to do it, but it's really what we have to work with here. Now it says it starts at 3 p.m. and right now, unless I don't have the right schedule in front of me, the only two options that would be Kennesaw State and East Carolina. Probably not going to get that. And James Madison versus Southern Illinois, which is on CBS Sports. We might get that. We've had James Madison in the past. They are a phenomenal team. They are just mowing everybody down. They followed their OT win over the Spartans with a double overtime win over Kent State, in which they scored 113 damn points. Then they scored 107 against a very good Howard team. By the way, Howard is 2-4. You might be wondering why I'm saying they're very good. They played Rutgers. They played JMU. They played Georgia Tech. Played Bryant. They have a game coming up against Cincinnati. They have a game against UC Santa Barbara. They have a game against LaSalle, Yale. Like, they have some really strong non-con opponents. Penn. When they get into their MEAC conference, they're just going to beat the tar out of everybody. Maybe Central, who's always competitive, and Norfolk State, maybe a little Coppin State. But this Howard team is going to be stupid good in the conference play, and they have really good players, Seth Towns, Shai Odom, Bryce Harris. So shout out to Howard. But James Madison beat them down. Matt JMU is playing at the 9th fastest tempo right now, 63rd in offensive efficiency. Their defense about 145th. Mark Byington has a really good thing going here, this JMU team. More opportunities for them to prove it here. The neutral court game against Southern Illinois. They have a home game coming up against Buffalo, a non-con against Old Dominion. That'll be a nice little test. And then they have a game against Louisiana, and they go into their Sun Belt schedule to start against Texas State and Louisiana. So they don't have a ton more opportunities, but they have some marquee wins. And as long as they don't have any bad losses in the conference, we're talking about a tournament team here. So going up against Southern Illinois, 78-74 is the Ken Palm projection. JMU, they're going to be fantastic anytime we have them on the slate. The starting five, Terrence Edwards, Noah Friedel, Julian Wooden, TJ Bickerstaff. We're well aware of him from his BC days. And Michael Green. The primary bench options, Bryant Randleman, Xavier Brown, Raekwon Horton, and Quincy Allen. Not getting to see as much of the Colorado transfer Quincy Allen yet. I still have very high hopes for him. We may have to wait another season for him, but remember the name Quincy Allen. He's going to be fantastic. So far, Terrence Edwards, who was 4-8 on that JMU slate a few weeks back, or a week or two, whatever, he was fantastic. Blew the doors off of that. His last game against Radford in 34 minutes, 31% usage rate, 21 points, 7 rebounds, and an assist. He took 18 shots. Probably won't be 4-8 if he's on the slate again. He has just been phenomenal. 24 real against Michigan State, 25 real against Kent State, 14 against Howard, 21 against Radford. The Kent State game, 10 rebounds, 6 assists as well. 45 minutes, 41, 34, 25, Have to love Terrence Edwards, but again, we won't be getting him at that cheap price again. Noah Friedel, very, very solid high-minute player. Lower usage so far. TJ Bickerstaff, great rebounder, good overall scorer, can do a lot. Has a nice, solid steal and block rate, like TJ Bickerstaff as well. So if this game is actually on the slate, might not be. Maybe I'm looking at the wrong one, and it's going to be, the other one that we mentioned, but JMU makes a lot of sense here. So Julian Wooden and Michael Green both playing high minute roles as well. The Southern Illinois team here, the Salukis out of Carbondale, they were very good during the Creighton days as well, beating up on them. Haven't played anyone of note really just yet. They've beaten the teams that they need to. The starting five that the Salukis have ran with: Troy D'Amico, Xavier Johnson, Trent Brown, AJ Ferguson, and Clarence Rupert. Does the name Clarence Rupert ring a bell? It should. He was on that St. Peter's team that made that magical run a couple of seasons ago. He was a freshman. Didn't play a lot of minutes, but he had a fantastic usage rate and shot rate when he did play. And he's developed so far with the Salukis into an elite rebounder, elite shot blocker, and somebody who is going to be a big-time player for them throughout the season. Xavier Johnson, there's been a lot of Xavier Johnsons throughout the course of history. There's been some really good ones in basketball, especially in college basketball. George Mason is this variation of Xavier Johnson. He transferred after 3 seasons with GMU, played on the Salukis last year, was an elite three-point shooter, shot 44% from in conference play, which made him 3rd best in the country. Certainly one of their top dogs right now. A 47% assist rate, his 5th highest in the country. 8.8 fouls drawn, that's 13th best. A top 75 steal rate. He's the number 2 free throw shooter in the country by percentage, and he does have a 29% usage rate. So Xavier Johnson of the Salukis, somebody to really kind of hone in on. Maybe we get some value with Clarence Rupert. AJ Ferguson, somebody who has a high usage rate as well, 27.3%. Again, Chicago State, he scored 20 points, 35% usage rate. There's just going to be a lot to like about this game if we do, in fact, get it on the slate on both sides. And I think it should be close. And JMU's already shown us they can make games go into the overtime realm. Oh, look at that. Adeem Bana still at 3 rebounds. Really impressive. I hope the Bruins lose in the next 30 seconds. Should have played Sebastian Mack. Good example here. I had mentioned Shedrick being a late scratch. We also saw Ademara, who started in the last Bruins game, didn't start in this one. That was, I believe, out after lock. He played just 6 minutes, and they played the other kid there. Bugnetso. I have his name in front of me, but I don't know the pronunciation. I said it on one of my first preview shows, but that's going to be one I have to practice. But I hate this Bruins team. Hate them with a passion. So mad that Bana couldn't get 8 rebounds. Hope Marquette wins. All right, let's move on here to some other games that should probably or will probably be on the slate. And we'll find that this slate might end up being pretty decent. Let me because we're gonna have some tournament games. Duke and LaSalle, probably a decent chance of that. Tennessee, Purdue. Yeah, let's do that. So Ken Pom has that one 71-67. He has his little thrill score for his watchability index. Sitting at the top of the day is, in fact, Tennessee versus Purdue there in the Maui Invitational. Purdue, of course, 3rd highest offensive efficiency, 5th best defensive efficiency. They are I like Cal to win the game. You talking about that one? I don't know, it might have started already, but Cal. Purdue playing really well. They did a number on Gonzaga. They did a number on Xavier. They, beat Morehead State and Samford. Well, Purdue's a lot like, this is a funny matchup actually, because Purdue is a regular season monster, right? Like Tennessee and Purdue both just are masters of the regular season, and they do such a good job, and they win the games they're supposed to. They eke out close ones. They do a fantastic job. So this is kind of a funny matchup in that regard, because both of these teams, coaches tend to struggle when it gets to March. Now, first in defensive efficiency right now are the Vols of Tennessee. They're 30th in offensive efficiency, 256th in tempo. Purdue's 189th. And you see on the Ken Palm page of Purdue, there's a lot of green. 3-point shooting, very good. 3-point defense, elite. Block rate, elite, thanks to Zach Edey. Their field goal percentage, elite, because they get a lot of bunnies. Then you go over to Tennessee, and their defensive efficiency being number one. They're very good. Their block rate, all that stuff, steals rate, they're just a very solid team. So we'll start with the Tennessee side. Zakai Zeigler, not all the way himself just yet. He's coming off the bench, did play 22 minutes. I am interested because he is going to probably be set sub 6K again. I think those minutes will continue to trickle up as he gets, more and more healthy, more acclimated. Now, he had a 30% usage rate in today's game against Syracuse. He did turn the ball over 6 times, but he was heavily involved. And I think his minutes are going to start to come from Jemai Mashak when it's all said and done. So Zeigler, somebody for GPP to look at. Jordan Gainey, probably not playable. He's one of those guys who transferred in, priced at 7K, 7.5. He was really good at USC Upstate, had a high usage role there. His shot rate here in Tennessee is 27% so far, but he's just a guy that's naturally going to lose, more and more minutes. Gone official, Marquette does win 71-69. Get out of here, Bruins. Get out of here, Adeem Bana. God, man. I knew Bono was going to be trash today too. He's going to be that guy that just, you fade him at 9K and you're like, this is a great fade. He puts up 50. Then you decide to play him and he puts up 12. Just great stuff. All right, so the starting 5 that the Vols ran with while Zeigler and Gainey provide their bench minutes. And, the Vols, they're a little deeper, but I think Barnes in close games is just, in that Syracuse game was close for the first half, but they pulled away, second half of the second half, if you will. But they're not giving minutes to Tobawaka, who was really solid at times last year. And they're not giving minutes to the freshman JP Estrella, who, will have to, by this time, he's the future center of the team once Idu leaves. But you know how it is with the transfer portal nowadays. Both of those guys could be like super studs at the mid-major level. And obviously the Vols are going to recruit well, and they're going to hit the portal hard. So JP Estrella and Tobawaka might be transfer portal candidates, because I don't know if there's going to be minutes for them on this roster. Triple J, Josiah Jordan James, 15 and 12, monster game. Healthy, finally, was hurt a lot last season. 34 minutes, definitely love Triple J here against Purdue. Foul trouble, a concern for him at times. Not like he has a super high foul rate throughout the course of his career, but he does have a tendency, because he's trying to make steals and highlight blocks, and he does a lot. He's very active, and sometimes that does lead to fouls. His junior season, he had a 4 fouls called per 40 rate. He has gotten that back down to about 2.5, but it did rear its ugly head at times last year. Love Dalton Connect. I've talked about Connect at length a lot. I did my whole little spiel about how this kid, North Carolina, should have done everything possible to add Dalton Connect. Just like the best player for their offense, the Brady Manick 2.0. Shooting 39% from long range, 29% shot rate, 26% usage rate, drawing 5.5 fouls per 40. He's just really good. And at this level, playing against upper tier competition, I don't think it's going to be a problem for him whatsoever. I do think peripherals will suffer as they get into SEC play, but he's going to be just chucking. Jonas Idu had one of the best games I've ever seen him play. 14 points, 11 rebounds, and a block. Very comfortable. Just really, really dominant against that Syracuse front court. We've seen some good games out of IDU in the past, but that was for what I've watched of the Vols games, and there's a fair amount. And that's really only the second time I've seen the Vols play this season, though. First time being against Wisconsin. And IDU was one of the best players on the floor. I was very, very impressed by the way he handled Syracuse down low. Love him. We'll see what his price ends up being. Santiago Vescovi, he's more of a GPP play at this point in his career. He's just not – I mean, he'll have those random blow-up games, but I think there's just too many guys, and I feel like he's not at the top of the mountain. He's not at the top of the pecking order. He might have been at some times last year and in his career, but he's kind of just like the fourth option on this team, especially after Ziegler gets back to the level he was at pre-injury. I mean, he's not in front of, to me, he's not in front of to connect, probably not in front of Triple J, and a healthy Zakai Ziegler, he's not in front of him either. Jemai Myshak, who has been a super value over the past season and a half, was really good. 8 points, 4 rebounds, 2 blocks, and a steal. He's always a solid value as long as he's under 6K. He is a usable asset to us as DFS players. All right. Purdue, obviously the decision is going to be, do we pay 11K for Zach Edey? Will he get to 11.5 and 12K? Now, I think some of you might remember better than I, but I believe 12.4K is the most expensive we have ever seen on a DraftKings or FanDuel slate. Back in the Draft Street days, pricing was different then, so they don't count. But I think 12.4 is the most expensive we saw Zion Williamson several years ago. Might Zach Edey get that expensive? It's possible. He's already at 11K. To me, he was a great fade, and he usually is, but at those prices, because you had to sacrifice so many different players on your lineup. Now, it ended up working for his owners, and it was about 50% on that early slate earlier. He put up 50, right? He had a big second half. Once he got all those Gonzaga front court players into foul trouble, it was a wrap. So it's going to be a tough decision on a full slate, but I do think he'll see 50, 60% ownership regardless of price, because people just know they got to have him. He's going to be a big-time producer. Now, I do think the Vols front court is capable of giving him some trouble. And that might be where we see some of the, JP Estrella, Tobawaka, some of those bigger players they have for their fouls, because they don't want to get, massive foul trouble on IDU. That would be a disaster. Now, IDU is not a big fouler throughout the course of his career. Now, they do have several players drawing fouls at a high rate, Dalton Knecht being one of them, and Tobawaka in a small role drawing 6 fouls per 40. However, he does have a 7 fouls per 40 rate in his own. They might utilize that. But I think what Tennessee will try to do, and what you don't normally see teams do, or it's not smart to do, is attack Zach Edey because he's just going to block your shot, right? But I do think it makes sense to sort of just go at him, make him block clean, and just, put the pressure on the refs there to make a call. I could see this Vols team relentlessly attacking, and depending on how that shakes out, there'll be a lot of kickouts. Dalton Knecht should actually feast in this matchup, and Jordan Gainey to a lesser extent there, depending on his minutes. Right now, Triple J, our guy, shooting 60% from long range, 9 of 15. Another candidate for a big game, because I do think three-point shooting is going to be extremely important in this matchup. So for Purdue, it really, make that decision on Zach Edey. You know the deal at this point. It's expensive, but he's got a high floor. You need that 50. You need 50 plus, technically 40 plus, but 50 to really get it done. Might he do it? Absolutely. I love Braden Smith, triple-double threat all the way. Price hasn't really adjusted all the way. Needs to be 8K plus before you could even consider him being mispriced in terms of the other way. Right now, anytime he's under 8K, he's underpriced to me. Over 8K might start to be fair or overpriced. So we'll see how that shakes out. Lance Jones, who has had a mediocre start, honestly, looked really good against Gonzaga today. He's, of course, the Southern Illinois transfer, played over 25 minutes, 28% usage rate. His usage rate in the last 3 games has been over 24%. He has a 27.2% shot rate. He's actually a really big part of what Purdue wants to do. Fletcher Lawyer is going through a sophomore slump. Can't use him. Trey Kaufman-Renn, who was amazing during their overseas exhibition games, has been a non-factor as well. Miles Colvin is the freshman. He's just too raw to matter at this point, although he is playing a 12 to 15 minute role, which if he's, sub 4K, he has been scoring, 8-9 points a game. Could be okay, but minutes aren't going to be there yet for him just yet, of course. There's a lot of guys like Caleb Furst, Cameron Heide, Ethan Morton, who are just guys that are going to kind of cannibalize each other. We'll have the random ham game. You'll see a big game from Mason Gillis at times or an Ethan Morton, but you just can't count on that. So it's really Edey. And if you fade Edey, do you still want some of this Purdue action with Braden Smith? I think Smith is an excellent play. Now, when it comes to Tennessee, I'm not usually going to be looking to target against one of the top defenses in the country. So I think for me, nobody on Purdue becomes a priority if you're not playing Edey. I think if Smith were to struggle, it would be in this matchup for what it's worth. But as of now, without seeing any other pricing, I would be on team fade Zach Edey. That's just me. I worry about playing these guys at 11K and not getting enough out of some of the other values that you need. All right, let's look at the Maui Invitational bracket here so we can see what else we're going to be working with. All right, so we know Kansas beat Chaminade. So Kansas versus Marquette. We just talked about Tennessee, Purdue. We already covered Gonzaga, Syracuse. UCLA will play Chaminade, whatever. So the next one we want to talk about there is Kansas versus Marquette, right? The Jayhawks are a well-oiled machine as usual. If ever there is a pay-up that I do want, it's a big man playing for Bill Self. And so far, Hunter Dickinson has looked the part. If there was a player to knock Zach Edey off the player of the year, mountain, top of it, I think it's Hunter Dickinson. He has been the lone pay up that I've jammed in the 2 times Kansas has been on the slate or whatever, and just been like, yeah, this is an absolute lock and load. His price is going to continue to rise, and you have to prioritize him. Bigs, primary centers in the Bill Self system are just animals every time. He hasn't always had that big center, especially the last maybe couple of seasons, but look at how good McCormick was the title run year. Haven't heard from him since. Hunter Dickinson, 31 points against Chaminade, 11 rebounds. You're going to be like, well, big deal, right? The nice thing is competitive games for Kansas, great. Obviously, their starters are going to play the whole damn game. Non-competitive games, they're still playing majority of the game. DeJuan Harris and Kevin McCullough played 35 minutes tonight. Hunter Dickinson played 32. Then we saw KJ Adams, who did come off the bench for Johnny Furphy, who played 17 minutes, but Adams played 26, Elmarco Jackson 24. Nick Timberlake, Parker Brown, and Jamari McDowell continue to play 5 to 10 minutes. Really not going to matter too much. Adams, who has started every other game this season, did not start for Furphy there, so that is a little bit interesting. I didn't actually pay attention to Kansas earlier. So I don't know why he didn't start. Doesn't appear to have any injuries. Just a lot of KJ Adams love, apparently, for the performance that he had. So regardless of him starting or not, he's obviously a good look. But we start with Hunter Dickinson, and we're going to just pay whatever price we have to pay. You saw what he did against the Kentucky squad that has injuries and front court deficiencies, having to be guarded at times by Trey Mitchell. That was a game where I was like, yeah, I got to be all in on Hunter Dickinson, right? 27 real points, over 20 rebounds, just a phenomenal game for him. The blowouts over Manhattan and North Carolina Central, they did play them less minutes there, but the rest of the way, and especially in a tournament setting like this, any blowout games, they're going to play big minutes. Dickinson was already a top center at Michigan, but unfortunately, Juwan Howard has some very questionable decision-making on his offense and defense for that matter. No disrespect to any Michigan fans, but clearly looking at his Kansas start, it's going to be a really special season for him. So far, 27% usage rate, 28% shot rate, a combined rebounding rate of almost 40%, 4% block rate, 3% steal rate. He's actually made 5 of 6 threes, which if you remember last year, he shot 42% on 57 attempts. That's an area of his game he's worked really, really hard on the last 2-3 off seasons. Well documented. And he is shooting 88% at the foul line. So you have a big man who can shoot free throws even better. Love Hunter Dickinson. DeJuan Harris, you can only really use him in times of desperation or when he's cheap. Everybody always says, me included, like the guy can't score, but he proved against Kentucky they needed somebody to score besides Hunter. DeJuan Harris was the guy. 23 actual points. Well proven that he's capable of scoring when needed. Didn't have to score against Chaminade, had 7 real points, still 8 assists. This guy's assist rate is through the roof, 32%. Shooting 63% from long range so far on 8 attempts. Now, he was a 41% shooter last year, which was really good. He's another guy that's worked super hard. He shot 64% his freshman year, but it was on 14 attempts. When he actually played a bigger role as a sophomore, he shot about 32%. He's worked his way up to a 40% shooter from there. So Harris is not to be trifled with, especially if his price is ever below $6K. It probably won't be because they know how good he will be, and he's always going to be under like 20 fantasy point player at worst. But if he ever gets in the 5K range, he's a lock. 6K to mid 6s, he's still okay. Love Kevin McCullough. McCullough against Chaminade tonight. It's not being talked about enough, at least I haven't seen on Twitter. Had a massive 22 point, 11 rebound, 10 assist game, 2 blocks, 3 steals. Like at this point, we're just going to play Hunter Dickinson and Kevin McCullough every single Kansas slate, right? Like the freshman they have in Marco Jackson, but it's not, he's going to have to be really cheap before we do use him because he's down the pecking order. And Johnny Furphy, who has a lot of potential, gets to learn under Dickinson, has a very solid shot rate, a bit of a fouler in his minimal minutes, but he's a very good 3-point shooter, at least early. Australian kid, 39% on 13 attempts, playing about 15 to 18 minutes. So, depending on what kind of value we need, might he be in potential, main team viability as a starter? Sure. But we have to know that KJ Adams is still going to be looming there to play minutes. Speaking of Adams, if he doesn't start again, it's probably tough to use him. He didn't have a big enough game for the price he has been. 8 points, 5 rebounds, a steal. We've been seeing Adams around that 6'8", 6'9" mark. So it starts and probably stops at Hunter Dickinson and Kevin McCullough. Both are going to be expensive, but I do not care. Against Marquette, it's going to be an absolute monster performance by both. Double-digit rebounds seems like an inevitability. The reason I was all in on that Bona rebounding prop, and it was plus 110 too, hurts even worse because it's such a good money-making opportunity, is because Marquette's interior is a bit soft. You go and look at the game they beat Illinois. They gave up 10 rebounds to Quincy Guerrier. Guerrier is not the most physical, imposing player. Dane Danger barely played. I think he would have monster game on the glass if he did. Marcus Domask had 6. Coleman Hawkins had 6. Hawkins is having a bad season, but rebounding at a high level. So you're seeing a lot of low front court players having a nice rebounding game there. You look at the Ryder game. TJ Weeks, so I know I was on him. What was it against Nebraska, right? He let us down. But the game against Marquette, 12 rebounds as a wing, 12 rebounds. 8 rebounds for their power forward, Mervyn James. 8 rebounds for their center, Tarek Ingram, against Marquette. And then you go to the Northern Illinois game. an easy win for Marquette, but their center, Yannick Conan Niederhauser, that's right, 11 rebounds in 22 minutes. So there is a trend here because Oso Ighodaro, very good, finesse style scoring center, and can rebound in his own right. But he's a guy that, to me, lacks the physicality to hold a guy like Hunter Dickinson down, and should have been a big game for Bona, but he got himself in foul trouble and was apparently disinterested. Does not scare me in the least bit. I'm going to be targeting front court players, or bigs, if you will, against Marquette with confidence all season long. And there are some good ones in the Big East, for what it's worth. So yeah, needless to say, we're playing McCullough and Dickinson, and we don't care. We don't care how expensive they are. We're going to make it work. We probably won't have this Toledo-New Mexico game. I talked about betting that one with Toledo. Would sure be a good one if we did. Might we get UAB, Middle Tennessee? Possibly. Duke LaSalle is probably one that we'll get. So let's talk about that, and then we'll finish up with any other questions or betting opportunities here. Duke, obviously, they are projected on KenPom to win 83-62. The Dukies taking care of business. They did have the tough home loss to Arizona, did beat the Spartans, followed that up with a huge win on Friday against Bucknell, where they had no trouble at all. We're typically going to see that starting five of Mark Mitchell, who's now healthy, Kyle Filipowski, Tyrese Proctor, who's still on breakout watch, hasn't gotten there yet, still a lot of season, Jeremy Roach, and the freshman Jared McCain, who had a nice 17-10 double-double. Mark Mitchell had 26-2. I still really like Mark Mitchell. I think from last year's recruiting class, he has an opportunity to be really good and one of the best at the collegiate level from that group. He's not probably going to go on and be the biggest NBA star, but he will probably stay another season or two at Duke and be like Jeremy Roach, how good he is at the collegiate level now. Caleb Foster, big time upside off the bench as a freshman. And then you have, a bunch of role players, the younger guys like TJ Power, Sean Stewart, and then also Jalen Blakes and Ryan Young. Mainly going to stick to the starters on this team, but you can play the blowout angle. I think McCain, depending on his price, he makes a lot of sense. And then Caleb Foster kind of violates the rules of not playing starters, especially erratic minute non-starters, but those would be a fine angle to play. The LaSalle Explorers, they are coached by Fran Dunphy. They started out 4-0, pretty solid. Defensively, awful. They're going to give up so many points against Duke, but they do have some viable options, and it starts with Khalil Brantley, who has a 26% shot rate, 26% usage rate, a 21% assist rate, draws 6 fouls per 40. Probably going to be a guy that comes in at like 7.5 though, because he is so good and putting up these kind of stats. The matchup's not great, but if anybody is going to do anything against this Duke team, it would be him. 38, 33, 33, and 35 minutes played, coming off a game against Southern Indiana in which he scored 30 real points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists. He shot 16 times. So he got to 30 points on 16 shots. That's pretty good. Made 10 of them and 7 of 8 at the foul line. So pretty efficient while he's doing it. Obviously, it's a different animal playing against Duke than the teams they've seen already, which were Southern Indiana, Northeastern, Bucknell, and Drexel. But I don't hate the idea of using some explorers here. The starting 5 that LaSalle typically or has used so far, in addition to Brantley, Raucus Josias, Deshaun Shepard, Anwar Gill, and Jameer Brickus. Brickus, an unfortunate name when you play basketball, especially if you are a bricker. The bench, pretty short, Andres Marrero and Tundi Valberg Fasasi. So they don't go very deep. So we're going to be looking at big minutes, probably like, 35-ish for the starters. Maybe not Raucus, but I do think Brickus, Gill, Shepard, and Brantley are a safe bet to play a lot of minutes. So depending on what the price tags are on those other guys, I suspect Brantley will be expensive if this game is on the slate. But Shepard, he's somebody shooting 40% from long range, very high defensive rebounding rate at 19%. I could see him being somebody as a kind of, low value that everybody would overlook, but I could see him having some success. Jameer Brick is shooting 44% from long range. He's not, in fact, a bricker this year. Did shoot 39% from long range and has worked very hard since his freshman season to improve upon all of his numbers. 24% assist rate, 22% usage rate, drawing 5 fouls per 40 for Jameer Brickus. And then Anwar Grill, who's playing 91.9% of the minutes. That's top 30 in the country. So Gill is playing a ton. 25.5% assist rate. Not the best shooter in the world. Only 18% on 12 threes. 21% shot rate. 21% usage rate. I would suspect Gill, even though he'll be on the floor a lot as a primary ball handler, he's going to get cuffed by Roach, Proctor. A little bit worried there. I do think it would make sense for them to throw Roach on Brantley probably, but they have some options here. But there is a distinct lack of size on this team. You have Raucus, who's 6'10", then you have a bunch of guys 6'1", 6'4", 6'5". The lack of size here going up against Duke is obviously going to be a problem. Does that mean we want to play Philip Kowski? Depends on what kind of blowout we're talking here. We saw Kyle play just 16 minutes against Bucknell in a game that was completely out of hand. He's going to be over 9K, so it's a very tough decision. We can go back and look at the Dartmouth blowout in that one as well. Philip Kowski played 27 minutes, had 25 and 7. And that game was on the slate. He ended up, I don't think he quite paid off on that one, but he was close. So we're talking about a pretty, I wouldn't say easy fade, but a pretty solid fade of Philip Kowski in a projected blowout. That would be my take at least. I'd rather use one of the freshmen for Duke or just kind of fade it all together. If we get a sub 7K Mark Mitchell, I could see them turning him loose, letting him play some extra minutes, and just continue to build his confidence. So far, Mitchell's been really good. His shot rate is 24%, usage rate 26%, has a block rate over 4%, drawing 6 fouls per 40. I still really think that we have seen not the real Mark Mitchell, or at least not the full potential and the variation of him that's going to be a really big star still in there somewhere. And I think that is going to start to shine and come out here as we go. Let's see what other games. I think that might be all we really need to talk about. Kind of tough to do it without the games available to us. Again, I apologize for that. We could see, like I mentioned, the UAB Middle Tennessee game, but we'll save it there. TCU does play as well, but they're playing Alcorn State. Alcorn State has been on slates in the past, so perhaps we get a little TCU action. If that's the case, the TCU mini stack is going to be in play. That's Jameer Nelson, Emmanuel Miller, Jacob Coles, and Micah Peavy. Really like this TCU Horned Frogs team under Jamie Dixon. I think they have a chance to be very, very good. 22, 23 wins, potentially a tournament team. They don't have the greatest non-cons. So there won't be a lot of room for error. They do play in a tough Big 12 conference. They do have Georgetown, Clemson, and Arizona State coming up on their non-con schedule. Be paying attention to that Clemson game for sure. That is a neutral court game, by the way, out in, I believe, Toronto. So that'll be a fun one to watch. All right, that'll do the DFS, projections or what we think. Let me just go through and look at the betting side again, because I think we have some props available to us. Maryland's on the prop slate here against UMBC. By the way, talking about disappointing teams, St. Mary's has been uber disappointing, and Maryland has been super disappointing as well. Both teams just do not look very good. I am enamored with Julian Reese. I think he's a fantastic player, but the guards on the team this year are not able to make entry passes, and I just don't trust them at all. So I can't even touch Julian Reese in DFS anymore, and I'm certainly not playing his props either. All right, we have some LaSalle props against Duke. That's exciting. Brantley, 19.5 PRA at -125. I have some interest there. I think Khalil Brantley, like I said, if anyone does anything against Duke, it would be him. And then I do like Deshaun Shepard's at 16.5. It is minus 130 though. So I wouldn't be surprised to see those tomorrow closer to game time, like 17.5, 18.5, and 20.5, 21.5 for Brantley. But right now they're pretty solid, even with the odds at minus 125 and minus 130. Minnesota does play tomorrow against Arkansas Pine Bluff. Dawson Garcia, speaking of bigs pissing on themselves, Dawson Garcia did not play particularly well in their last game. Super frustrating. I just, it's going to be hard for me to really use him because he's one of those players I feel like when he's on the slate, he underperforms, and then you have a Minnesota game off the slate and he just completely obliterates the world. So they have a points prop on him at 16.5 and it's minus 145. It's not one that I want to touch. There are some other ones here that are at least interesting. Elijah Hawkins, 10.5 points at plus 100. He hasn't been tasked with a big scoring role. Minnesota's a bit deep on the perimeter. Hawkins, who played at Howard last year, has scored 9, 8, and 10. So he's going to have to do a little bit more. But looking at it, he has a 25% shot rate, a 21% shot rate. Sorry, 24% usage rate, 21% shot rate, has taken 11 triples so far. Shots haven't been falling for him so far. He's 30% on his 2-point field goals, 27% on his 3-point field goals. Eventually, those shots are going to fall for somebody with a higher shot rate and is taking that volume. Having a match again or a game against Arkansas Pine Bluff, I do feel like this is a nice little spot to go to him because those shots are going to start falling here. Plus 100 for over 10.5 real points for Elijah Hawkins. You will be able to find these and others once the additional games drop on the FTN Bets tracker. Mike Cutry and Mike Randall are absolutely crushing it. We are, as a team, doing very well, especially on props, and the Randall killing the sides and the totals. So if you're not a member of the FTN Bets side, I would highly recommend you do so. We also have Josh Gross, who is a prodigy when it comes to women's basketball. He crushes women's college basketball betting. Just an absolute monster onto the level of Cutry with his props. And then, of course, we have our NFL and NBA guys who are tearing it up too. All right, one more prop that I like and I need to be careful with, but against UMBC, Julian Reese, I'm not taking any of his like PRAs, his points, any of that, but going up against UMBC, single-digit rebounding prop of 8.5. It's minus 115. I think he should dominate the glass. Reese has foul trouble, or no doubt about it, but this UMBC team, they are a horrific defense. They are playing at the third fastest pace in the country. Rebounding, they're pretty awful. Looking back, they almost knocked off Louisville to start the season, 94-93. It took some late heroics there. But Mike James, 10 rebounds. Trey White, 9. BHH, 10. 6 off the bench for Emmanuel Okafor. This is not a very good rebounding team. Look at what they did in a win over Loyola Maryland. 3 different players over 6 rebounds. So Julian Reese should be the ticket here with 8.5 rebounds. Maryland is coming off 3 straight losses. Davidson, UAB, and Villanova. They need a get-right win here. Ken Palm has it 80-63. Julian Reese, who has a combined rebounding rate of 30%. Bring that prop home. Can't trust him anywhere else. You can't trust anyone else on this team except that rebounding prop. All right, I think that'll do it, man. I was hoping that some of the slate would drop in here, but we'll probably get that overnight and into the morning. They should be set up for the early slate. There will be an article for that slate tomorrow. Mike Randall will be handling the Tuesday slates as he normally does, and then I will probably have I'll definitely have a player pool in the Discord and my core as well. But I may do a little bit of a pre-lock show just to kind of tie things up for the subs, maybe an hour or two before the lock or before the actual slate locks. Otherwise, we'll be back tomorrow night, right around 9 p.m. PST, midnight EST. We may have the same issue with the slate coming out late, but we will do our best covering those Wednesday games. Then we'll be back also Friday night to cover Saturday's games, and Wednesday and Saturday morning for CFB. Thanks for everyone who continues to support the Super Show. I appreciate all of you. See you tomorrow, and let's go out and get more green screens, shake off the bad days, embrace the good ones. It's a long, long season. See you guys.